here today. I am Dr. Arden Anderson, and it's been kind of a busy day. I was up at 5 this morning. I am a flight surgeon at Whiteman, so I had to have morning meetings and so on this morning before coming out here. So why am I running? Well, I grew up on a small dairy farm in Michigan. I know what it's like to pitch manure with a pitchfork by hand, milk cows, and work on the farm. I know what that process is about. I'm also formerly a teacher. I taught vocational agriculture at the high school level. I have a master's in public health. I have a PhD in ag biophysics, and I'm a physician. And that's not just to brag about, oh, gee, you got all those degrees. Number one, education is very important. The other thing about it is, though, I actually have experience and training in the various issues that we need to change in Kansas, that we need to overhaul in Kansas. Number one is healthcare. As a primary care physician, a family doc, I'm also an occupational medicine doc, so I understand the connection between what goes on in the environment, what goes on in the workplace, and human health. As a flight doc in the Air Force, I have traveled around the world and I have had to evaluate other countries' healthcare systems. I also taught ecological or biological agriculture for 30 years. When somebody talks about how we can change the environment, how do we regenerate agriculture, how do we address the issues of having a problem with commodity prices, we have to start right here at home. I know how to do that. I've taught that. I've consulted around the world on farms, everything from small greenhouse operations to the largest farm that I've worked on was 110,000 acres in Australia. In every kind of a climate, every kind of soil that you want to talk about, we've regenerated. We can make Kansas carbon neutral in 5 years. I know the technology and we have the data to prove that we can do that. If we're going to change things in Kansas, you actually have to know about how to do it. You can't just rely upon lobbyists or advisors. You actually have to have some information on how to do that. And we're going to talk later as we get through on education, on healthcare specifically. And again, thank you very much, everyone, for being here today. It certainly is a pleasure. It's a beautiful day. And we'll talk later.
Still had 12 seconds.
Jack Ferguson will be next.
Alrighty.
Let me get my timer off.
All right.
It's gotta go. Start.
All right. As she said, my name is Jack Ferguson, and I'm running to be the next governor of the great state of Kansas. I got into this race because I saw there were many issues that weren't being addressed by other politicians or by the state government in general. So I'm looking at the questions I have here on the list, and I'm going to go through some things that I don't say on there that I want to make sure everyone knows. First, I'm the only candidate that I've at least heard fight for meaningful drug reform. I am fighting not only to legalize marijuana, as it is a crime. We're putting people in jail for using medicine and for altering their consciousness. Not only are we doing that, we're also harming our students, as we are depriving our schools of a valuable funding resource like they have in Colorado, like they have in Washington and other states, where they use the tax revenue they get from the marijuana and they put it into their education system. We could do the same thing here in Kansas and make sure our students get a great education. Also, I am also fighting to make sure that we eliminate the sales tax on food. It is a tax on poor people. We are taxing it is a tax that hurts the poor people. We need to get rid of it. So what we do is we get rid of it and we add a luxury goods tax. So those at the top, if you're buying a new sports car or something like that, you can pay the extra tax. But if you need every dollar you need to go to groceries, you can make sure that every dollar you spend is going towards your groceries and not to go into the state government. So I think those are two of my big policies that I don't see that are exactly on this list. But also, I'm running to make sure that we have a clean government. I'm the only candidate that has taken a pledge to take no more than $500 from any individual contributor, and I'm not taking any industry money. I am taking money only from the great people of Kansas to make sure that when I am governor, I represent the great people of Kansas. I look forward to the forum. Thank you all for being here on this wonderful day, and I'll give up my time.
good?
We're good.
All right, very good. Well, first I want to thank Eileen and Martin for organizing all of this. And Martin, I particularly want to thank you for arranging a visit with my old and dear friend Don Jolly, who's over at St. Luke's Living Center. I saw him just before I came here. I am Laura Kelly. I am a state senator, 14 years. I'm also a wife and a mother and a very proud daughter. I grew up in a military family, so we moved all over the world. By the time I was 6, I had lived on 3 continents, and by the time I was 15, I had moved 12 times. So when it came time to set down roots, Kansas was really the very obvious choice for us. We chose to come here for 2 main reasons. One, the absolutely stellar public schools, and the deep sense of community that I wanted after a nomadic childhood. So we came. My daughters, I have 2 grown daughters, both of whom received world-class education in our public schools, and that's exactly why I am running for governor. I want every Kansas kid to have the same opportunities my daughters had to succeed. You know, we have been, and this mission to do right by kids is really a lifelong mission for me. It began the day I walked out of high school and went to work with troubled teens. Then followed that up with 18 years with the Kansas Recreation and Park Association, traveling all over the state of Kansas, working to make our communities better. And it's followed me into the legislature, where for the last 14 years, I've worked to do things like create and fund early childhood and after-school programs. So working families have always been my highest priority. Now, for the last 8 years, Kansas has been in a world of hurt. Sam Brownback and Jeff Collier have dismantled our state. They have decimated our public schools, and they have damaged the very fabric of our communities. Kansas is in a crisis, and what we need is a strong, experienced leader to put our state back together again. You know, I'm not running on a personal political agenda. You know, I'm running to help Kansas and to help our families. And through my work on the budget, my commitment to education, my commitment to health care, I think I'm uniquely qualified to fix this mess. And that's what I plan to do. I'm known as a person who can work with anybody to get the right things done. That's why I'm a Democrat state senator in a very Republican district, and that's why I will win in November. I'm ready to get to work, reverse the damage, and start investing in our state again.
Ward, can you hear back there? Is that turned on loud enough? I couldn't tell. Okay, let me know if it's not.
Good morning. I also want to thank the Marion County Democrats and Eileen and Martin for setting this up. I'm appreciative of the Harvey County Democrat I saw walk in. 2 of us. And some Dickinson County Democrats are here. I have to give Martin kudos. He listened to my speeches 20 years ago when I first started. He used to be the pastor of one of the churches in my legislative district down in southeast Wichita. One of the things that I think is the biggest takeaway in the last 6-8 months as I went around this state talking to people is the energy that would get you into a building inside on a beautiful Saturday morning to drive from Newton or to come over from Abilene to talk about the future of Kansas, because that's what this election is. What kind of place are we going to live in? For the last 8 years, it has been a very selfish, cold, cruel place. And I have always believed and fought to the top of my lungs in the legislature that that is not the essence of Kansas or Kansans. I've always believed that we work better together than apart, and my biggest criticism of Brownback and Collier and Kobach is their attitude that the only way things work is if I win and you lose. Zero-sum game. And that's not how Kansas was built. That's not how Kansas has grown for the last 156 years. That is not how a kind of community that empowers people and makes them thrive. It's more of a cooperation and empowerment. When did we get away from the idea that investing in each other is a bad idea? It wasn't the way we started this day. It was very common to have neighbors help other neighbors build a barn or to bring food over in times of crisis. I was in Greensburg, we were talking about that earlier, 11 years ago, after a tornado decimated that community. And they weren't talking about whether the Democrat house got knocked down or the Republican house or who was going to pay for it or how the government, they were saying what needs to be done, what's next. That's the kind of Kansas philosophy that I bring to the table, that we do better together collectively, and we can do better, whether it be getting our kids a good education and graduates in college, whether it be quality health care, whether it be good jobs that make kids want to stay in Kansas and build their families and their businesses, whether it be empowering the agriculture, rural sectors of Kansas to be successful. We together can do that. And it's a much better place to live. And that's what I will try to create in Kansas under the Ward administration. Look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. One thing I think some of you have mentioned and I did not announce, I want to be sure, just for my own reference, I know some, but I want where you would call home, just to be sure. Where you would say?
I call it
Topeka,
Kansas.
yeah. And you're from?
I'm from Wichita.
Wichita. And Dr. Anderson, you're from?
Olathe.
Olathe, okay. I thought that was it, but I wanted to be sure. Okay, I have some questions, and we'll try not to double up here too much. I just liked everything all of you said. And I think you're all great candidates. But can you pick out a particular unique skill or experience or quality that makes you the person that would stand out? Can you think of one thing you would like to highlight that would be your best asset? And we did place these in front of you, if you look, so maybe you had a chance to think about it. So do you have just one or two quick things that you could share that would single you out? Because right now I liked everything I heard. We'll go in the same order.
And we have 90 seconds, correct, for that?
Yes.
Well, I think there is a list here of issues of strengthen and improve public schools, address healthcare needs, particularly underserved, improve Kansas roads and infrastructure, strengthen rural communities, and our farm economy. I have professional education in pretty much all of those areas. And healthcare, of course, is the main profession that I'm in right now, along with agriculture. And so the thing really that makes me unique of all the candidates, all 21 or 22, whether they're Democrat, Independent, Libertarian, or Republican, is that I actually have the professional skills in healthcare. I've actually had to analyze healthcare for the U.S. military. I know what goes on around the world. We spend $10,000 to $11,000 per person in this country. Australia spends $4,300. We don't have 2.5 or 2 times or even twice the health care in this country, what they have in those countries. What we have is we are 11 out of 11 in the quality of our health care. We are #1 in maternal death and child death in this country. I know how to turn that around. I know what the causes are. I deal with it every day in my practice in Lansing and Leavenworth. 1/3 of my patients are Medicaid, Medicare. I understand that process. Thank you.
Well, I think this is a question that's a little more difficult for me to answer, is I haven't had a lot of experience in terms of what traditionally people would call experience. But there is one thing I'd like to say. I care about Kansas. It is my home, and one thing that I will say is I am the youngest candidate, so therefore I have to live with the consequences of what I do in office the longest. So, I definitely care about what I need to do. So one thing I'm thinking, so when I'm governor, during the off sessions, when the legislature's not in session, I'm going to travel the state of Kansas and listen to people, hold public town halls across the state, figure out what people want, what I'm doing wrong, what I'm doing right. So I know, so I can really build a consensus, because I'm not, it's not really, I would not be the governor. The people of Kansas run the government, and I'm just the person there in Topeka that represents the people. So I will definitely work hard to make sure that I'm representing the people well, and I will be very listening. I will give public updates regularly. I will be very open and very, and also one thing is I'm going to come back at this is, I am the only candidate so far that has made a big part of my platform that I am taking only donations up to $500. I know I said this earlier, and I'm not taking any industry money. So this really says that I am people-driven, and people-driven is really what really I think is a good quality of mine, and that I hope you consider. Thank you.
Well, I think I've got a combination of skills that make me the right candidate for this job, particularly at this time in our state. My 14 years in the Senate, I've spent focused on issues like the budget. So I know down deep what's wrong with Kansas, what's right with Kansas, and I know what we need to do to fix it. I also have relationships across the aisle that I can bring into the governor's office and use. Being governor is not a one-man band. It really has to be a team effort, and you have to be able to work with others and be able to attract the best and the brightest to come to the table to help solve the problems of this state. And I think the fact, I also can do the math. There are 9 Democrats in the Senate and 31 Republicans, so someone has to be able to work closely with our Republican friends to craft good policy and move things forward. And I've got that skill set. I have the trust and the support of my colleagues, and it goes beyond that. It goes out into the communities where I've been very engaged, regardless of party, with folks, advocates across the state, particularly those advocating for public schools, mental health, and roads and infrastructure. So I think I've got the knowledge, the skill set, the relationships, and the determination to get things done from day one.
I can beat Chris Kobach. I am the only one up here that I believe can beat Chris Kobach. So the next question is, okay, why? I am able to analyze, understand, articulate issues and democratic priorities in a way that people respond to. That's why I've been successful in an area that's a third Democrat, a third Republican, and a third independent. And you know what I think? And I've heard this over and over and over the last 10 years. There's more Democrats than are registered. There are more people who agree with our priorities of good schools, good health care, good jobs, that an economy that works for everyone, not just the top 2%. They just want to hear people talk about it out loud, in public, in a way that says democratic priorities can move Kansas forward into a better place. And that, I am that messenger, and I would relish the opportunity to discuss that with Chris Kobach.
I really should have looked and kind of dovetailed this onto that, because Jim actually kind of went into a bit of that. And this question is, so you may want to repeat a little or add something different. We don't know who the Republican opponent is going to be. We're kind of making an assumption at this point. Is that according to polls or whatever? But who knows? So whoever that Republican opponent might be, we've had great Democratic governors in this state for being a very red state. And so I'm hoping we can achieve that again. But what quality do you think you really can ascribe to that makes you be able to defeat the Republican? And that's kind of a little bit like you were already answering about your special skills. So if you want to add something to what you just said as far as defeating the Republican for a minute, go ahead. Say more.
All right. I really don't care what the Democrat is, what the Republican is, what the independent is. And the issue is that Kansans, just like many people in the rest of the country, are really kind of tired of standard politics. If you look at Virginia, you look at Alabama, you look at Pennsylvania, it was not standard Democratic politicians that won. They were outside people who won in extremely red states because they also addressed issues. The most important thing we have to address, well, there's two most important things in the state of Kansas. It's healthcare and education. As a colonel in the Air Force, we don't have Democrats and Republicans when we have to address issues as officers. We have to find out what is the mission. You take the mission and you put the people together that know the skills necessary. But the interesting thing about being an 06, I have to know in the medical squadron, I have to know every skill that every one of those people has as well. And so in overhauling healthcare, because that's what we need to do, we need to overhaul it. I know the various aspects, the various skills, and the various things needed in order to overhaul that. That is a topic, that's an issue that we have to talk about, regardless who or what party we're talking with.
I'll go ahead and give you 90 seconds on added time to this.
All right. I think really when you look at the policies, my platform mostly aligns with the American people at large. If you look at my position on healthcare, which is for the state level is a little different than what I believe overall, because at the state level I believe we need to do a public option, much like the Nevada system, much like the Nevada plan that failed last year in the legislature, passed the legislature but vetoed by their governor. Or we look at drug reform, or we look at transportation. We look at all that stuff. If you look at the public polls, progressive policies, Bernie Sanders style policies, win usually about 60-70% with a plurality of Republicans supporting. So I believe we are out front. If my policies are put out front in an appeal to an appeal to the working class, I believe I can win, and I believe I will win the general election as my policies closely align with what the people believe. The reason Democrats have had so much trouble recently in the past, 10 years, is we have sort of gone to, platitudes and cliche. We look at Hillary Clinton's campaign, which was mostly, look at this, look how bad Donald Trump is. He curses because she wouldn't come out and say, we need to get rid of TPP, we need a living wage. She wouldn't say those things. I mean, she would in a debate with Bernie Sanders because otherwise he would have just ran the floor. But when it got to general election debate with Donald Trump, she wouldn't really fight for those things. She wouldn't, and that's why she's not president right now. So I believe when I am campaigning, I will fight hard, and I will win, because that's what wins. Progressivism wins. Stalemating old style Democrats, that era in our party is over, and thank goodness.
Well, I'm pretty confident that I could beat Chris Kobach. One, I would never have gotten into this race if I didn't think I could beat him, because I did think I'd get through the primary, and I did think I'd be facing Chris Kobach. So, and we based that actually on some private polling that I have seen, which shows exactly that. That if I go head-to-head with Chris Kobach, I will beat him. I think that's important. I think the reason that the polling shows that is because I am known as a person who is sort of calm and steady and smart, as Steve Kraske said in the Kansas City Star. That's my general reputation. I think it also can't be lost on you or me that I am the only woman running in this race of 20, a field of 20. And not that I think people should vote for me because of my gender, but the fact of the matter is that women go to the polls in a greater percentage than men do. And I think we've seen a sweep across the country of women running for and winning offices. So I think that the combination of the polling that I've seen, the reputation that I have, my willingness not to step down or back off, and the fact that women will be coming out and voting in droves makes me one.
I can beat Chris Kobach, period. And I'll tell you another reason why I believe that's true. Leadership. For the last 8 years, there's been a huge vacuum in this state with no leadership on a number of issues. I am privileged and honored to be the leader of the Kansas Democrats in the Kansas House of Representatives, where we repealed the Brownback tax experiment, where we fought to reinvest in public schools and higher education, where we stopped a crazy idea to go back to Brownback tax experiment 2 just yesterday about this time. It's a where we continue to push Medicaid expansion at every opportunity. I believe Democratic priorities spoken articulately and forcefully in the public arena will carry this election. And I have the same public polling data that shows that I can beat Chris Kobach, which says Chris Kobach's pretty unpopular, but never underestimate Chris Kobach and his ability to compete in the arena. There was a debate with the Republicans a couple of weeks ago. Remember when Jeff Collier was given an opportunity to go back and have a conversation, and they said, well, he brought your name up, you can speak more if you'd like. Jeff went, no. Kansans want leadership. They want articulate leadership, and I bring that to the Democratic nomination.
This is a whole different venue of a question. Given the money factor and where it comes from for candidates in the state and the country, with that background in mind, what will your campaign do to make an A rating from the NRA a scarlet letter?
Well, I think the issue that we really need to understand, as a flight surgeon, I am the guy on the base that determines whether or not our security forces are allowed to carry weapons. And in the Air Force, we do not allow anyone with a mental health disorder or on any type of mental health medication to carry, period. It doesn't matter what their training are, it doesn't matter what they did last month. If they now are diagnosed with a mental health problem, they're not allowed. So number one, we need legislation in the state, actually nationally, in my opinion, that states the same thing. Because the military is supposedly greatly trained, not supposedly, they are greatly trained. And particularly our security forces. So if we understand at the professional level that someone who is well trained and specifically trained with a weapon is not allowed to carry if they have a mental health disorder, why do we allow that in the civilian world? So that will be the first step. And Texas wouldn't have happened if we had communicated that information from the Air Force to stop people with mental health problems. I guess my time's up.
I think we definitely, I'm against all, I believe elections should be publicly funded, so I'm not taking money from any organization. But, I would never take a donation from the NRA, even if I was. But we have to look at why I'm going to take this as a broader question on gun policy. And what we need to do is we need to make it so that, yes, what our Dr. Anderson was saying, that people with mental illnesses cannot get guns. I think that's the first step. And so we need to institute ultimately a national universal background check. So so when you buy a gun, if you're unfit. We can just pretty much, I think that would solve a lot of our problems. It wouldn't solve that probably would have stopped many of our mass shootings that we've had recently in our country. But also beyond that, we need to look at, restricting military-style weapons from being in civilian life. Although I am a strong advocate of the Second Amendment, and I do believe in the right to carry for defense, and I am supportive of concealed carry, we need to look at what kind of weapons can be carried. And I do believe you're not going to carry around a semi-automatic rifle if you're wanting self-defense. That's obviously not what you're using that for. So I think we definitely have to balance liberty with safety, and I think my policy is a good compromise. If you want to read my full policy, you can do so on my website. Thank you.
I've actually been a supporter of the Second Amendment in the state of Kansas. And I actually had an A rating from the NRA right up until the time that I voted to ban guns on campus. And that's all you need to do. One blemish and you're out. So that was a couple of years ago. That had nothing to do with running for governor. Last year, we voted for and were able to get a ban on guns in our state hospitals, even our psychiatric hospitals, our community mental health centers. So we've done that. This year, we were able to pass a bill that will take guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. We had a number of other amendments that were offered that did not pass, but they came a whole lot closer than they did a couple of years ago. The conversation about guns has really changed. Our kids have made a huge difference. So just recently, went through my old campaign finance reports, and I found that the NRA had actually given me $500 in 2008. So I just recently sent a check to Moms Demand Action for their use to continue advocating for gun safety common sense. When I'm governor, what I plan to do is to convene law enforcement, mental health, education, and public health, parents and students, and craft a common sense, comprehensive gun policy for the state of Kansas, and then use the office of governor to push that through.
Well, if you'd wait for us politicians to change the A rating into a stigma, you would never get it done. You know how it got changed? Kids who said they did not want to live in a world where they could be killed in math class any longer. That they were the first generation that could die in math class, and they wanted it stopped. They didn't care about the NRA. They didn't care about ratings. They said enough is enough. I was proud to sponsor the kids that came to the Capitol and to be the keynote speaker for the kids that marched in Wichita. They picked me because of my background. For the last 10 years, I've been consistent on guns. I said that I supported carry and conceal in Kansas when it required a background check and training. I think that I supported the right to hunt because I believe Kansans have a history of hunting and self-protection and collections. I draw the line in bringing guns into schools. I don't think they belong in any level of education. I draw the lines in bringing guns into the courthouse unless you got a badge. I don't think they belong in churches. I've been great vocal. I believe we should have universal background checks. That means if you go down to the Coliseum, and when they can't do it anymore, but remember when they used to have those big gun shows, those Coliseums? You should get background checks before you can buy a gun. I believe you shouldn't buy a gun on the internet without having a background check. I think that you should be disqualified because of your behavior from owning or possessing a gun because of a violent criminal background, domestic violence or other crimes. I believe that there are certain mental illnesses that disqualify you. I introduced a bill called Red Flags, which would allow parents and teachers and people who see that mental illness to go to court. I think we can do common sense gun safety in Kansas and will when I'm governor.
This question shifts gears to the issue of business in Kansas and bringing business in Kansas. So how and what can you do or do you plan to do as governor to bring business to Kansas?
Well, the most important thing for business coming to Kansas, actually, we want to create businesses here. We want small businesses to start here. The more we depend upon big businesses to come into the state from other states, the less dependable they are. We need to create small businesses here. I think that General Motors and what's the motorcycle company? Harley Davidson are the two best examples of, they just left last year out of Kansas City because there's no loyalty in the big companies for the state. So we need education. We have to have skilled workers so that businesses want to start here. And so the businesses that are already here can get workers to replace the people that are retiring, or in their expansion, they can fulfill those things. We have a number of IT jobs. I know just in the Kansas City area, I was talking to one of the union electricians. There's 1,000 IT jobs, very good paying IT jobs in the Kansas City area right now. They cannot fill because they don't have skilled labor, skilled workers in order to fill those things. So we have to have a tax system that helps local businesses and small businesses in Kansas, because they're the ones that are going to be loyal to Kansas. And number two, we have to have a training program, both education-wise as well as vocational-wise, that replaces those people that are retiring, and so that businesses can develop and work in Kansas.
I think the United States, but particularly Kansas, we need to look, obviously what Dr. Anderson was saying, jobs bring in, education brings in good paying jobs. I think that's really the best way to do that. Besides, we can't really do what Brownback tried to do, if you lower taxes, they will come. No, that did not work. So we have to look at other ways to bring it, and obviously education will help with that. So if we look to what many other Western European countries have done, is tuition at college is much cheaper, or sometimes even paid for by the government in those places. And yet there are more people, if they want to, can afford to go to college. Here in the United States, and Kansas in particular, with ever rising tuition, it is hard for bright, smart people to go off to college sometimes because they cannot afford the tuition. They have to go right into some low-paying job at McDonald's. And we have to change that. We need to look at even giving heavy subsidies, or we need to look at eventually going to tuition-free college, so we can make sure that every child who is smart enough and has the desire to go to college or can go to vocational training and get a good paying job. And I believe that's the best way to do it, because the government has to provide for our young people, and that's what we need to do. Thank you.
I would agree that education is probably the number one economic development process in the state of Kansas. And so we need to invest in education from early childhood to K to 12 into our career tech ed, our higher ed, and then on into the workforce. That is absolutely number one. Two, we have to start reinvesting in our own infrastructure. If we want business to come here, we've got to have the infrastructure to support them. So we have got to do that. But perhaps maybe the most important thing we need to do is we need to change the national perception of Kansas, and even Kansans' perception of Kansas at this point. The last 8 years, we have been the laughing stock of the nation, fodder for late night TV. That has got to change. We really need a governor and others who can make Kansans proud, and make Kansas a place that our own young people want to stay, and that will and can attract businesses to come in. We also need to reestablish things like the Kansas Bioscience Authority, which was put into place in 2004. The Kansas Bioscience Authority took Kansas from off the radar in the bioscience industries to 5th fastest growing in the nation. It brought good jobs, it brought high-tech jobs, it brought a lot of offshoot jobs into the state. We defunded it because we needed to pay our bills because of the tax cuts. We need to reinstate programs like that are good investments that will bring jobs, good jobs to Kansas.
reestablish the principles of collaboration and partnerships. There are businesses across this state, as I've talked to businessmen and women, that say, I need qualified workforce. I'm having a difficult time getting good people in the door. I talk to kids, my kids, as Emily and Zachary's age, that are desperate to get good jobs. I believe a governor committed to rebuilding those partnerships can be a big part of that. I see educators and business leaders talking about what they need when kids walk in the door to go to work, what skills and how can we put those together. I see a governor being a facilitator for all that. I think we need to expand in broadband internet across this state. It's our rural electrification program, and we need to get started right now. I believe that infrastructure, which means roads and bridges, are critical to moving our goods around. I think we need a bully pulpit. I am shocked that the Republicans of this state are silent while the president starts a trade war that'll have a massive impact on rural Kansas. And we have to, believe me, I will not be silent when the president takes steps to destroy our 42% of our economy is based on rural Kansas and agriculture, directly or indirectly. We cannot be silent. And you cannot do anything in this state. Our prime foundational block is education. Whether it be pre-kindergarten, K-12, higher ed, technical ed, there's apprentice programs that a lot of our unions are doing. Those are the kinds of things that a governor committed to building and bringing people together to collaborate can make a difference.
I just have a couple more that were handed to me, if anybody else has one, we'll see how our time goes here to finish up. This one is back to the health care issue, but it specifically asks if you know of another country that you feel like could be a model for our public health system, that might serve as a model, another country that we could emulate in any way to improve our health system.
Well, 90 seconds is not quite enough to discuss all that, but
We'll give you 2 minutes.
2 minutes. The Air Force actually commissioned me 2 years ago to go to Estonia and evaluate their healthcare system. I ended up with strep throat, and I actually had to experience that healthcare system. But it is interesting that when you look at an evaluation of 195 countries' healthcare in the world, we're 35th, Estonia is 33rd. Australia is number 2. Estonia spends $3,600 per person. Australia spends $4,300 per person. The United States spends between $10,000 and $11,000 per person. All of the other countries' systems are not single-payer systems. That's a fallacy. They are all dual-payer systems. They all have both a public and a private system. Now in Australia, 32% is private. The rest of it is public. And the way that they have that system set up is that as your income goes up, so does your copay and your cost sharing. So understand, yes, there are a number of countries that have very good models, much better than ours. And by the way, out of 11 richest countries, we're 11 out of 11 as far as our actual health. The actual health of our citizens. So $10,000 to $11,000 per person isn't working. Australia's system works very well. They have a public hospital and a private hospital. If you go to Sydney, I've been there 20-some times, teaching agriculture. You are not necessarily going to get a different surgeon to replace your hip in the public hospital that you do in the private hospital. It may take you a little longer to get it, but you're probably going to get the same surgeon. The only difference is, in the public hospital, there's 4 people in a room. In the private hospital, you may only be the single person in the room. So, yes, there are models. We have the model to overhaul Medicaid in this state. I know how to do it. It's already out there to be duplicated.
I think one thing we have to look at is the cost of prescription drugs. And I think a lot of this, it goes into part of the reason why healthcare, even like Medicare, Medicaid, is so expensive for the government, is because it has been written into the law that the government cannot negotiate drug prices. Well, I'm going to use an example. In Canada, they can. That's why drugs are often so much cheaper in Canada than they are here. That's why as many Americans that live near the northern border, they drive into Canada to get their drugs because it's cheaper. So we definitely have to look at reforming at the national level. We need to think about how we're going to reform that and how we're going to allow the government to be able to be more cost effective and to stop being, and part of this is campaign corruption. And a lot of the politicians that have not refused to change this are bought by the insurance companies and by the drug companies. What a shocker. So we definitely have to look at that. Campaign corruption kind of goes into every issue. But also we need to think about we need to look at, I'm gonna use another state as an example. I brought this up, but I didn't really explain it. The Nevada plan, it was introduced, but it was passed in the Nevada legislature last year. It would have essentially allowed all Nevadans to buy into a Medicaid expansion program. Essentially would have allowed pretty much everyone to get health care. If you could not afford the private insurance on the Obamacare exchanges, you could get public health care. You could buy into Medicaid, which would be cheaper than the private insurance. And this is simply I believe that this is as a temporary solution until we can get nationalized health care, regardless of whether we do a one or two payer system. But we need nationalized health care. But as a short-term solution, I believe we should be allowed all Kansans to at least buy into Medicaid. Thank you. It's Medicaid. The plan is Medicaid.
I read a fascinating book several years ago called The Healing of America. It's by T.R. Reid, who was with the Washington Post. And T.R. had a bad shoulder. And so the Post asked him to take his bad shoulder all over the world and see what the approach to fixing it would be. What would it cost? How long would he wait? What would they recommend? So he did. He took it. He started here in the United States, and it was full shoulder replacement. Took it to England, and it was a little bit of you have a long way to get in. Maybe you ought to learn to live with it. And then took it to South Asia, where they use more alternative medicine, interventions, acupuncture, and those kinds of things. And took it to other places where they did a combination. They said, okay, one, you have to learn to live with it. You're probably never going to play golf again. Two, but you can do this to relieve the pain and increase your range of motion and make it more functional. So I think there are other models out there that are a lot cheaper. My sister and brother-in-law live part-time in Denver, part-time in New Zealand, have done that for years. They save all their medical stuff for New Zealand because it is so much less expensive and the quality of care is good. So yes, indeed, there are other models. We need to explore that as a country, and we need to be open to change.
Healthcare is personal for me, and it's because my mom, who's 83 years old, I was her firstborn, and when I was little I got pneumonia and I almost died. I spent my first birthday in the hospital, and she tells me I got the last rites. I don't remember that, but why it became personal to me is that it was so important to my mom that she told every girlfriend I ever had in high school that story. And what I thought, I laughed too. I thought, oh Mom, how embarrassing. But I thought about that. How traumatizing would it be to be a 21-year-old mother, your firstborn, sick in the hospital, and she had good insurance. My father worked at a company that provided insurance, and that stuck with me. 650,000 Americans file bankruptcy because of medical debt. We can do better than that. There are things that we can do right now in Kansas to improve the quality of health care. We could expand Medicaid and provide 150,000 Kansans insurance, some for the first time in their lives. We can do telemedicine, which is a fancy term that says that we have technology that can bring the best and the brightest into every community in this state through technology for diagnostic and treatment. We should do that. And we should make the insurance companies pay for it. We should expand the scope of practice to make sure that qualified people can do treatment in areas that might not have a doctor. We have to do what Jack said. We have to do something about the oppressive cost of drugs. And we can do that in the state and as governor, I will. I don't know that there's any magic model out there. It's not being afraid to experiment with ideas that have two goals in mind: to increase the number of people who can have coverage and to reduce the oppressive cost. You should not have to choose to be healthy or to pay your rent. And under a ward administration, we will be that incubator of change. Okay, I got the message.
He got the message. He got-
Neither would I.
One thing we haven't touched on at all, or very little that I heard, was the issue of the roads in Kansas and the infrastructure. I think it's pretty common knowledge that the DOT monies have just been siphoned away into other areas to somehow make our state stay afloat. You can probably tell more details about that than I'm aware of. But other than, of course, needing some money for Kansas roads and infrastructure, or if and obviously that's a given, how do we go about doing that and getting our road system up to good quality?
Well, no question, we have to have an infrastructure plan. And we've put off rebuilding or repairing roads, bridges, culverts, various different infrastructure projects throughout the state over the last 8 years. And so obviously we've got to get more money into the system. But like many other things, we also have to evaluate how is that money actually being spent. When you put in a 10-year road and then finance it with a 30-year bond, which is exactly what's happening in many areas, that's ridiculous. It doesn't make financial sense, nor does it make engineering sense. And if you talk to some of the older engineers, and I've had a little bit of soils, water, and engineering in my undergraduate, so I know the lingo, I know how to talk about these things. Plus, I had to teach some of the basic construction when I was a VOAG teacher. So I do understand it. We have to actually revisit the engineering specs for our infrastructure, because we have to make sure that when we put a road in and pay for it or put it on a bond, it lasts just as long as the bond does. And there's only so much money to go around. So we have to put in better quality roads so that we don't have to continue to replace those roads every 5 to 10 years. Or like we're seeing on the south end of Kansas City now on 435, we spent all last year supposedly repairing this 435, and guess what? The same area now is tore up again. The exact same area. That is stupid engineering. We have to look at that and revisit that whole process as well. So it's not a matter of just putting more money into it. Yes, we need to do that. It's also how we put that money in and reevaluating what the engineering specs are.
I'm giving you 2 minutes.
All right.
That was just too short.
I think, we can all agree our roads are in bad shape and we need to fix them. I'm going to talk about some other areas of infrastructure and transportation that aren't being talked about as much in this campaign, but I view as just as vital. One thing is we need to re-attract passenger rail service to Kansas. We need to look at getting Amtrak back to Wichita, and more service out of Newton, possibly a northbound train, and also, make it just easier, because one thing I've seen studies that the more access the person has to transportation, to transportation, the more economic mobility that it actually very increases economic mobility, upward mobility, so people can rise up, so they can get to jobs in the bigger cities, so they can get to education opportunities in the bigger cities. So we have to look at that. And it's also something that companies like when they look at coming somewhere, is there viable transportation? And also, just on the way up here, I was driving up on 135 and I saw United Airlines billboard. They're flying out of Salina now to Chicago and Denver. We need to definitely fight for more of that essential air service contracts to be coming into Kansas. I've been seeing more of that, which is definitely good. But I think we need more service, more flights, more trains. I think that is really what will help, because that helps people being able to get to jobs and opportunities in the major cities to help Kansas grow and to bring and also companies really like that. If there's a flight into rural Kansas, then they're more likely to come and look at rural Kansas as an opportunity for their business. So I think, but beyond roads, essential air service contracts and luring Amtrak back to Kansas, I think, are two of my biggest priorities in terms of transportation.
You know, over the past 8 years, we've actually robbed the Kansas Department of Transportation of over $2 billion. We did this year put together a transportation task force that will bring in stakeholders from all various agencies and asking them to look at ways that we can provide dedicated, non-sweepable money so that we can reinstate those comprehensive 10-year plans that have been a hallmark for Kansas since 1989. So that's an important thing. We also did, it's not much, but we did not sweep $61 million from the transportation plan in this budget that we just finished this week. And we're telling the department that they must fulfill the obligation to give each county or each transportation district their $8 million that was pledged in the original transportation plan. So we're starting to chip away at that. You know, thank goodness we did not pass that tax cut plan that was being bantered back and forth and passed in the Senate. Unfortunately, the House killed it yesterday. Because if we had done that, then there would be no opportunity to not only fund our schools, but transportation and everything else. So we smartly killed that, and I think we're going to let the dust settle on the tax changes that we made, the federal tax changes, and by January of next year, I think we'll have a much better idea of what our fiscal situation is, and transportation will be very high on the priority list of things that we need to reestablish.
When we talk about sweeping money from KDOT and stealing the highway money, I don't know about you, but sometimes your eyes roll over. It's a lot of big numbers from the government. Here's what it means in real life. In Wichita, have you been on West Kellogg? All that construction, they're doing, that's a good thing, believe me, because that was the most dangerous intersection in the country, I think. If you go up to Johnson County, that Golden Triangle, it got done. Guess what didn't get done? Highway 69 down in southeast Kansas that we've been promising for 10 years. If you go north on 75, which is north of Holton, a couple of kids got killed last fall because we can't make it a Super 2 because we've taken the money away. You go out to Dodge City, their roads aren't getting done. You say, well, okay, they're not getting done. It matters. It matters immediately because we get economic stimulus from people building roads and fixing bridges. We used to do about 12 to 1,500 miles of maintenance a year. Now we're down to less than 200 miles. Second thing is I used to drive back and forth. I went to Creighton and Omaha, and you take 81 north. It was a 2-lane and went through all these little small towns. And Nebraska did something that I don't think I would have done. But they created a 4-lane, which I liked, believe me, but they went around the towns. And last time I went, I don't go very often anymore. I don't have relatives. But I stopped in those little towns, which I used to stop in all the time and get gas or get lunch. All those places are gone. Roads and bridges and infrastructure are economic stimulus to the community. And we did it right in Kansas, and we're going to do it right again. We went out to communities and said, what do you need? What will have the biggest impact in your community? You have a chance. What do you need? And then we put together a 10-year plan to get it done. Now, we didn't do it, but what we're going to do is go back and see what we didn't get done and put it right, because it is vital to Kansas.
We could probably ask lots of questions, and I still have lots in my mind too, and I'm sure that many of you have others that you could think of or have thought of. And it will be up to the candidates as we end here shortly how much time they have to visit with any of you who maybe didn't get your question addressed or would like to ask a little more. We'll go ahead to do closing statements. Right, Martin, what do you think?
I would like for
Oh.
to address the criminal justice,
Oh, okay.
the lack thereof issue.
The criminal justice system, okay, we haven't addressed that at all. So, so we'll have answers to that then, and then go to closing statements and, okay, all right. So specifically on criminal justice, or how did you phrase that? Just what reforms or
Two
change?
issues we didn't talk about was the agricultural economy and how to address that, and
Criminal justice.
We'll give you 2 minutes and
Maybe you could-
try to combine the two however you.
We'll stay here as long as you want, but you all might have lives you want to get back to.
Well,
I think what Eileen said.
Right, I mean, like I say, I could listen and ask, and maybe some of you can, but you may have commitments and you need to be moving on, but, that's true, we didn't get to those, and so if we could, have those addressed and give them, what are you giving them, 2 minutes for
For the total.
for both topics?
Are they including their closing?
Oh, are we,
No, we're not.
Okay, criminal justice. As an occupational medicine doc, I take care of the guards at the Lansing prison, as well as a number of the police officers in that area. And I also take care of some of the prisoners that are on work-type programs and so on. So I'm quite familiar. Also, I am a NAFCARE physician. So people coming out of prison, they're in a halfway house, and then they go out home. They're in a halfway house anywhere from 3 to 9 months typically. I take care of those people as well. So I'm very familiar with how the criminal justice system is failing Kansas. Number one, we had to deprivatize it. Just like Medicaid, we need to deprivatize it. Because in the privatization process, the first priority is not taking care of rehabbing the prisoner, it's how do we make money on the prisoners. The last thing that they want is to rehab the prisoner because then they lose them. Now they lose money. So we have to deprivatize public services. It is so stupid to think that we can run services, government services, like a private business. They're separate. They're not the same thing. We cannot have profit as the number one goal for public services. So in the prison system, the new prison up there, by the way, has no outdoor facility. The new one that's being built, great. So once a person gets in, I can tell you from a medical perspective, these people are never going to go outside. You're talking about having problems with rehabilitation. We have to overhaul the system. We start by deprivatization. Agriculture, I know we're at the end of that. We'll hopefully say a little more about that at the end. But what we have to do with agriculture, number one, we have to get trained people. And that's one very important thing, is vocational training in the ag sector. And one other issue is that part of the rehab program, there's actually a federal program right now in rehab of prisoners, and the rehab is training them to be ag workers. I'll talk about that maybe later or privately.
I think one of the greatest things we can do to help bring back the Kansas farm economy and rural economy is we need to legalize industrial hemp. Not only is this going to help us go to a more greener society by using it to build to make things more sustainably so that it can replace oil plastics. So we need to do that. So we need to and it takes relatively little water to grow. So we can start transforming a lot of it can become the new cash crop for Kansas, and it can provide a lot of opportunity for farmers that are struggling, especially as we go into a world where we need more sustainable options, and we need to legalize it. It needs to be legalized across the country. I know some states are talking about it, but here in Kansas, that needs to be at the forefront, because not only will it help us be more sustainable, it'll help our farm economy grow. And on the criminal justice issue, we need sure reform. Part of my drug policy is legalize marijuana, and then release all the nonviolent drug offenders via a gubernatorial pardon, so that those people can get out and rejoin society as they have done nothing wrong. so we can help really bring back people into the Kansas economy, and we can leave our prisons open for violent offenders, and so we don't have an overcrowding of prisons. That's the big, and also we need to Dr. Anderson said we need to deprivatize. Yes, we need to get rid of all. We need to have public prisons that are run by the government, because I believe if you have, the government is of the people, and if you have the people running prisons, you're going to want people want to help people ultimately. So that'll help us prisons be more humane and more focused on rehabilitation rather than focused on making money and stuff. We're focused on rehabilitation, getting people out and back into the life as soon as possible, if possible.
Just very quickly on the agricultural issue, I think the best thing Kansas can do to support our rural ag communities is to adequately and equally fund our schools so that the schools remain in our communities. Also, the expansion of Medicaid. Not only are we not providing access to health care for 150,000 Kansans, we are also putting in peril our rural hospitals, some of which have already closed, and I think half of them are on the verge of it if we don't do something to infuse it. You lose your school, you lose your hospital, you lose your community. So I think that's the most important thing we can do for our ag community. I actually started my career right after college in the criminal justice system. I was a correctional counselor at a minimum security facility for boys in Hannah City, Illinois. So I learned that system from that vantage point. I am a big believer in prevention. I don't want to talk about building more prisons. I want to talk about putting programs in place that keep people out of prison, particularly starting with our youngest. I believe early childhood education is a very important investment, getting kids ready to succeed when they get into kindergarten so that they don't go wayward when they hit middle school and high school. So if we can invest in them young, we can keep them on the straight and narrow, and they won't need to go into prison. If they do have problems, we need to have crisis centers that are regional. We don't need to be sending our kids to Topeka to go to jail. We need to keep them close to home, family, schools, so that they can be reintegrated, supported in their own communities. And I'd say the same thing about our adult population. The more we can do to keep them out, the more we can do to lower the rate of recidivism, the better off our system will be and the fairer it will be. We don't have time now to talk about the discrimination that actually occurs in our justice system. We know that an overwhelming number of African American folks proportionately are imprisoned, often for offenses like Jack mentioned. So that's another area that we need to reform, but I think first and foremost, we need to support our prevention programs.
I'm an old prosecutor. There are bad people, and they belong in jail, period. Too many people are going to jail that don't belong there, and we have taken steps to reform to reduce the penalty for marijuana, to paraphernalia, to do different things for crimes that don't involve violence towards other people. And we need to continue to do that. One of the biggest failures we're not doing is while we have their attention in prison, we're not doing anything. We're wasting that time. We're not getting them the GED. The number of people in prison without a high school diploma would boggle your mind. We should do GEDs and get that done. Almost all of them who are in prison have drug or alcohol problems. We should try to take steps to break that addiction. And unfortunately, a lot of them have a mental illness. We should use this time better. And when they get out, we shouldn't just cut the rope and let them go. We should try to build infrastructure to help them while they're out so that they don't say, well, what else am I going to do? I'm a thief. I might not be a good one, but it's something I can do. Or violence is that frustration. There are things we can do to improve. First, safety is number one, and then to try to save as many people who have made mistakes. Agriculture in 30 seconds. I push back a little bit because I've been all over rural Kansas. They care about the same thing we care about in Wichita. Good schools, good jobs, safe streets. There's some unique parts of agriculture. Broadband, we got a lot of it in Wichita. They don't have it in a lot of places in Kansas, and we should do the broadband expansion. Infrastructure, we've talked about that. That's a huge piece of rural Kansas and the rural economy. We talked about the trade war. But what's really, the Republicans, to their flaw, have ignored it. They just assume they're going to get all the votes out in rural Kansas because, well, they always do. And they have failed to address the rural needs for the last 8 years, and that's an opportunity I'm going to take advantage of in this election.
We are so appreciative of your taking your time from, I know, has to be a hectic schedule, has been already. I'm sure it promises to get even more hectic. And we just certainly wish all of you well with your campaigns. We wish you the best luck in all that you're endeavoring to do to get your message out. We wish that to all of you. So we'll let you have closing remarks here. Anything else that you can think of that you would like to point out or emphasize, we'll give you time now for closing remarks. And I guess 3 minutes. Martin says 3 minutes.
I think that's what we promised.
Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. And I know we certainly appreciate your coming out. Excuse me. There's really 3 issues that I want to make sure that we are able to cover. Education, we know, is absolutely the most important issue, regardless of whether they're talking about healthcare, we're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about jobs. Without education, none of those happen. So we know it is a very, very important issue. But what nobody else is talking about is the crisis that's looming that could bankrupt the state, and that's called developmental delay. If you look at the change in the number of autistic children we have today versus what we had when I started medical practice in the late 1990s, it has gone up and up and up and up and up. In 1980, it was something like 1 in 5,000. When I started practice, it was 1 in 250. The latest 2016 data nationwide says it's 1 in 59. There's some areas in the country it's 1 in 32. The federal mandate for individual education plans costs between 2 and 5 times more than a regular child to fund. So we're talking in some autistic children $100,000 a year to fund their education program. We know medically what the cause of this is, but it's not politically correct to talk about it. It's mercury, aluminum, pesticides, and industrial chemicals. That's what is causing. We know that medically. It's all over the medical literature. How many of you read medical literature? See, there's only a couple people that do. It's in the medical literature. We have to address that aspect of education. Number 2, this whole Medicaid issue. We need to overhaul Medicaid. I know my colleagues here say that, gee, we need to expand Medicaid because we can extend it to 150,000 people. If we turned that around and overhauled that system with the current budget, down to what Australia spends, we could expand that to 370,000 people. Not 150, 370,000 people. And then we can expand it. That significantly overhauls and changes the state. We also need to incorporate for the middle class, perhaps a direct primary care model. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. The direct primary care model is sweeping across the country. And it is an option for middle-class Americans to take care of their day-to-day health care. And then they have a policy for catastrophic health care. It makes it affordable. We're looking at $50, $75, $100 a month, as opposed to some people are having to pay $2,000, $3,000 a month in premiums. That's not working. It doesn't work for the average person. Or then, of course, we're really going to have a 3-tier system. The wealthy, they can afford basically whatever it is that they choose to afford. But we've got to address the middle class, and we have to address the lower socioeconomic level. And then finally, the ag side of the equation, real quick. We have to diversify agriculture. We have to teach farmers how to be more productive. We have the technology to do that. And most importantly, do you understand, we have corn and soybeans in this country, but we import 600,000 acres worth of corn and soybeans into the United States because American farmers are not supplying domestic markets. So we need to teach farmers to supply domestic markets. That's how we really address Kansas agriculture.
I heard it brought up earlier, the idea that we need to expand rural broadband, and that is definitely true. And I'm going to go a step further. Back in the 1930s, President Franklin Roosevelt, he instituted the Tennessee Valley Authority to get rural electrification to the Appalachian region. I believe we need to do the same thing in the United States and in Kansas as a local state government to institute a government-owned company that will lay and operate the broadband at a reasonable price to those people in rural Kansas. So a lot of times, it's not profitable for the companies to go out there. But honestly, if they started to lay the line and go out there, they'd probably charge way too much because there's not a lot of users, so they want to make some money. But if we operate as a government service to the people of Kansas, we can afford affordable rural broadband to the people of Kansas. And I believe we need to follow the model of the Tennessee Valley Authority as it worked so well in the 30s and 40s during the Depression. And it helped electrify rural America, and now we need to modernize rural America, and I believe we need to start with that. And also, that's one of the few things I didn't get to say. And now I just get to say that I think you've seen us all here. I think everyone has articulated very good policies that will help transform the state of Kansas for the better, and I hope you take time to consider my policies and what I've articulated here. And I would just like to remember that I will be on the ballot on August 7th, and as will everyone else here. And we want you to go vote on August 7th. And it was great being here in Marion County today. Thank you.
Yeah, I do want to thank you again for putting this together. It's been great fun. We know that we have been through a lot these past 8 years, but I'm convinced that we can overcome these challenges, and it's going to start with this election. We really do need to come together to win in November. I came here to Kansas 32 years ago because of the opportunities that it provided for my young family. We had good jobs, stellar schools, top-notch universities, and that our real commitment to our communities. And all of those things that are so important to Kansans have really been put at risk over the past 8 years. So if we want to rebuild Kansas, if we want Kansas to be a place that our young people want to stay and raise their families, we must invest in them. And as governor, I will put our kids and our families first. I want those kids to want to stay here and raise their families. I want Kansas to be an innovative business destination that attracts companies. And I want Kansas to have the best schools in the nation. After years of turmoil, Kansans need and want a leader, an experienced leader who can bring people together and start to solve the problems facing our state. And that is exactly what I plan to do. And I've got the experience, and I've got the relationships, and I've got the grit to go to work on day one and start putting our state back together again. As I told you, throughout my career, I'm known as someone who will work with anyone, regardless of whether I see eye to eye with them, to promote good public policy. That is how I've won 4 elections in a very Republican district. That is how I have gotten things done in the legislature, and that is how I will win in November. I'm ready to go to work for you. Laura Kelly, thank you.
My name is Jim Ward, and I can beat Chris Kobach in November. I gotta tell you say, well, why do you pick on Chris? You know what Chris Kobach said many times across this state in the last few months? The only mistake Sam Brownback ever made was he didn't go far enough. And I'm gonna bring the tax cuts back. And you saw what happened yesterday. Chris Kobach's education policy, quote, I was educated in a double-wide trailer. It's good enough for me, it's good enough for anybody else in this state. Third policy, immigration. Chris Kobach says if we want to crack down on immigration, we have to allow law enforcement to pull people over based on the color of their skin and ask to see their papers. That is the stakes of this election. And you say, well, what about Collier? Well, I don't know about you, but I think 8 years is enough, okay? We do not need a third term of Sam Brownback, and that's what the stakes in this election are. So if you want to go back to a Kansas that works together and collaboratively, who could go back to a state of Kansas that believes in reinvesting in each other to build a better place for not only us, but our kids and our grandkids. I tell the story, my daughter just got a new job. She works in Denver, Colorado. She went to KU, got a degree, and took it to Denver. She got it perfect, exactly what she wanted job. She sits at her desk and looks out the window like we look at the lake. It's the mountains. Could not be prouder of her. You know what the problem is? She got it in Denver, Colorado. It should have been in Wichita. It should have been in Kansas City. It should have been in Marion, Kansas. We have to do more. And as your governor, we will keep kids like Emily Ward here in Kansas. But I need your help. If we're going to build a better Kansas, I can't do it by myself. No governor can. I need your help. And so with your vote on August 7th, we will begin the steps to build that better Kansas.
I cannot thank you all enough, candidates and Joe. And I cannot thank all of you out there enough for coming and giving up some of your time on this beautiful day to listen to something very important for all of us. Again, I want to say we so appreciate it. I want to make this statement, though, and I'm sure the candidates are all aware of this. Marion County Democrats at this stage cannot endorse anyone at all. Individually, you can certainly, but Marion County Democrats cannot. But you can bet your bottom dollar, whoever comes out after August 7th, we are going to go to work. So we will make that pledge, and Joe, we already know we're working for you because there's nobody. We can support you right now because at this juncture you don't have another Democratic opponent, and so I hope you all remember Joe's name too as you go, and tell all the unaffiliates that you know who have to declare when they go in August. They have to declare to be able to vote. Tell all of the people that you know that are Democrats, some of them still may be in their closet, I don't know. They just aren't sure if they should advertise that. But tell them we have names on the ballot in August at the primary. It is not that old lame excuse that, oh, well, I just don't have anybody to vote for in August. You will. And I would also like to encourage those of you who are precinct people to please get your paperwork filed by June 1st. And we are also searching for other precincts to fill. And so we need to go to work to get those all filed and into the county clerk's office by June 1st. Is there anything else? Because I've been thinking and forgotten, and Martin keeps me straight here. What, besides the food?
I have a few signs for Joe.
Okay.
I've got to think about 3 or 4 that have not gotten out. So if somebody's at a good location in her district, we'd love to give you a sign.
Possibly as you came in, Martin lives just right across here, and there was another place too where we have some of Joe's signs up. She's getting her name out every bit she can. She's already been working hard for quite a number of months. And there are some more signs that you probably saw, say Schwartz for Kansas, give the Facebook site to go to and keep track of Joe in her campaign, because she is a hard worker, and she's been working hard already, and we want to help her. Is there anything else? Thank you again, and we really want the food to go home with people. But now here's the question. Did we rustle up some bags and things to take it along? Pockets? Napkins or there are plenty of extra plates.